My guest today is Aditya Karkera, the Chief Data Officer for Government and Public Services Practice at Deloitte Consulting. Aditya, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Great to be here, Jason.
Let me set just a little bit of context for our discussion today. There are 58 Chief AI Officers across large and small agencies. Many wear multiple hats. They wear the Chief Information Officer or Chief Data Officer hat along with their CAIO hat. But no matter how many hats these Chief AI Officers wear, the foundation to make artificial intelligence work is still going to be data. Agencies must understand what it takes to make sure their data is ready and to be used by AI tools. One example of this data preparation is the Commerce Department recently released a request for information. They're currently reviewing the responses to that RFI, where they're asking industry experts, researchers, civil society organizations, and other members of the public on the development of AI-ready open data sets and data dissemination standards. At the same time, a lot of agencies are also reviewing their own internal data sets and determining what needs to be done to make them ready for AI tools. For how they can accelerate and improve that approach, return to Aditya Karkera from Deloitte Consulting. Aditya, let's start with the data preparedness. That's critical for AI. We've been hearing about this for years. Why is it different today than maybe it was ever before? What can agencies start to do?
So Jason, I think we're living in a really exciting time today, right? We're surrounded by AI applications as we speak and live today, right? AI is literally mainstream today in our lives. I mean, and that's not just in one industry, it's across industries. And government is no different, right? I mean, think about us sitting here, digital watches, digital dashboards, retina scans. We're seeing an exponential growth in the volume of data surrounding us, right? So the processes and the data management techniques that worked, excuse me, like you said, a decade or a couple of decades ago are no longer as efficient. We really need to rethink and reprioritize the approach we are taking for data management today, right? And because, of course, data is the fuel that's driving AI applications today, right? So the saying, garbage in, garbage out, I don't think that has rung truer ever before. The data that you're going to provide as an input to these AI applications is going to drive how effective and trustworthy those AI applications are. And like I said, as the volume of data around us is increasing, and government is no different, I think we just need to come up with the new and reprioritized methods of managing data, approaches that are going to help us reprioritize data quality, data security, data privacy, data trust, right? So there's just a lot going on in this data space, and we as data leaders need to be at the forefront of managing how we're taking care of this data and how we are prioritizing our data policies so that the AI applications coming out are trustworthy and actually effective for our citizens to use.
You talk about the processes and techniques that we've relied on over the years are no longer as efficient. Is that just a normal evolution, or is because AI and the tools that use AI are requiring a deeper set of processes, a different set of processes? What has changed beyond the technology themselves?
Well, that's a great point, Jason, and I think that kind of gets to us, unlike the challenges that government agencies are facing today as they are looking at getting their data AI ready to become the AI-powered organizations of tomorrow, right? And a lot of it is that just the nature of the technology landscape has changed. A lot of government agencies, what I continue to hear, are dealing with legacy data infrastructure, legacy data systems, right? And if you don't have a data-driven culture front and center, by which I mean that is, are you really treating data as an asset for your organization? You will not have the right data policies in place. You will not have the right data standards in place. All of those challenges together are, impacting our government agencies and is really becoming a key important topic for our chief data officers, or like you said earlier, all the C-suite leaders today, right? So all those challenges around, the state of the technical infrastructure, the state of our data infrastructure, and the lack of having a really data-driven culture, all of these things are coming together and impacting how data is being managed and prepared, and is impacting how we're creating AI applications today.
Do you get a sense when you talk to government customers that data-driven culture is still in development? I mean, we're never at zero, we're never at 100 with anything else. But I feel like when you go back over the years, we've been talking about the importance of data, the idea of data is the new oil, right? I'm sure you've heard that 101 times. I can date that back to 2006, 2007. So we've been talking about it, but what's the culture change that maybe still has to happen or still is happening?
I think you're right. I think we have been talking about it for a minute, it seems like. However, with the role of the chief data officer now coming up in government, I think we're starting to see a shift. And what we mean by having a data-driven culture is really having that data-first mindset, right? Are we making decisions based on experience, or are we making decisions based on data? And we've seen that change over the last few decades. And I mentioned the role of the CDO, Jason, because I do think that CDOs have been really uniquely positioned. And we've seen a rise in the number of CDOs in the federal space today, which is really helping drive that data-driven culture. So, creating that data-first mindset is definitely been a deliberate effort for most CDOs that I've talked to. In fact, we have started to see that efforts like creating a data literacy program has become a key component of data strategies for chief data officers, right? Because we are no longer at a time where just knowing data is a choice. We have to be literate about data. And when I say data literate, it means that we have to have the mindset to be able to read, write, and comprehend data and use that in ethical manners. So chief data officers coming in and implementing data literacy programs, AI literacy programs has really become a game changer and helped with the data-driven culture situation for the agencies.
Somebody who works in government may say to you, well, I work on data all the time. I am making decisions based on data. But I think what you're trying to get to, and this is where I would just maybe want you to really focus in on, is you're not just talking about, hey, I work on a spreadsheet. Hey, I have this BI tool, or hey, I can look at data and make a decision. There's a deeper piece to this that you're talking about.
Yeah, you're right, Jason. And I think, we're living at a time where data is everybody's business, right? Data literacy just does not mean that you have to be a data scientist. That level of data literacy or some version of literacy needs to exist in almost every person in the organization. Now the competencies with data literacy might be different for somebody who's an executive versus somebody who's hands on the keyboard. But a component of some version of data literacy does need to be existing throughout the levels of organization. It needs to be happening across levels of the organization, as well as different types of positions that exist in the organization.
You mentioned the CDO role. We'll go down that path in a second, because that has evolved over the last. But I just want to maybe take a half a step back. As organizations, as agencies are saying, okay, we have to be this data mindset, what is the biggest challenges that they're facing to make that culture change? Again, is it the training piece, getting people, or is it actually the back end saying, okay, where is our data? What is in the data? Is the data clean? I love that you mentioned, and I've heard that many times over the last couple of years, garbage in, garbage out. That's so true today is a good lesson.
Yeah, I think you have a great point there, Jason. Creating that data-driven culture is a complex problem. And you see all of the C-suite leaders, especially the chief data officers, talk about this. But what does that really mean? You're right, data literacy is a key component of it, but also leading by example is a key component of it, right? The executive level sponsorship needs to come along, and executives need to lead by example to show that they are really wanting to use data in day-to-day decision making. You also touched on, the state of the data infrastructure and legacy systems. Together with that, think about the challenges our workforce is facing today. Are they really in pace with the emerging tech, not just AI, but with any emerging tech? And how can we make sure that that workforce is trained and ready to work with AI and other emerging tech? And for that, data is foundational. Of course, like we said, data is the fuel that's driving AI applications. So you have to have a level of data literacy across the board to drive a data-driven culture.
I want to dig deeper into this idea that executives need to lead by example. And I think a lot of the C-suite, right, the CFO, the CIO, we can C-suite along the alphabet, will say, okay, I use data all the time. Do you think this has to even go above them to the assistant secretary for management, to the deputy secretary and secretary, who they must demand a little bit more from their okay, why are we making that decision? How do we know that program's working? What does the data tell us about the impact we're having or the services we're serving? Those are the types of questions you expect that can change that culture?
100% agree, Jason. Yeah, I mean, that does not just mean that we are looking at the topmost level of the executives to ask those questions. They must lead by example so the rest of the workforce follows their lead and asks those same questions, makes those same efforts to ensure that the data that is in front of them know the sources and know if it's trustworthy. So having the leaders lead by example is great, but also having maybe some sort of incentive programs to say, okay, if you are showing your participation in data literacy programs, or you're going out and learning a new language, or you're learning a new tool, how are we incentivizing it? In fact, Deloitte and Data Foundation did a study, I want to say last year or the year or somewhere around there, about data literacy in the government sector. And we talked about executive sponsorship, incentivizing programs as some of the key methods how we can have successful data literacy deployed across the organization. And I would encourage the audience to go out and look at that too.
We'll make sure we link to that survey as well on the federalnewsnetwork.com, make it easy for people to find. I do remember, I think we probably reported on that survey as well. It's always good when the Data Foundation is involved. The last, we're pushing up against break, but before we go there, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the legacy systems piece, because when we talk about preparing data, when we get this idea of, okay, how do we make sure that the data that we have is ready to be used by the AI tools, there's a whole series of, it's not just the metadata and the data itself, but where that lives and how they're connected, the APIs and the like. Is that another struggle for agencies where they're saying, okay, we just aren't quite ready to connect those dots?
Yeah, that's a great point. We hear that a lot actually, because we're spending so much time just ensuring that all of the disparate data sources are actually connected. Are we even aware, or are the organizations aware of what data sources exist? And do we have data quality checks at every piece of the data lifecycle, not just at data collection, but throughout the data lifecycle? Are there the right guardrails in place for the organization to say, have we made sure that the checks and balances are there to ensure the quality of data is appropriate as you feed that data into AI applications? So all of that really comes down to, having those robust data governance policies in place, right, together with the data infrastructure. So the legacy systems, as they think about modernizing those, we have to keep having a robust governance framework, having the right computing power and data infrastructure available, because you can only do so much with the current computing systems that might be in place in some organizations. And to really harness that power of data, Jason, having that data governance framework, having that literacy programs across the organizations, as well as having the right computing power is so important.
All right, you laid out the next set of questions probably we'll get to, but first we'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue our discussion. My guest today is Aditya Karkera, the Chief Data Officer for Government and Public Services Practice at Deloitte Consulting. I'm Jason Miller, and you're listening to the discussion Data Readiness for AI and the Expanded CDAO Role, sponsored by Deloitte on Federal News Network. My guest today is Aditya Karkera, the Chief Data Officer for Government and Public Services Practice at Deloitte Consulting. Now, Aditya, you mentioned in the last segment the CDO role, the Chief Data Officer's role, and how it's changing or how it's maybe evolving. Let's talk about that, because I think that's a key point. You mentioned the need for data governance framework. We talked about legacy systems as well, and of course, data literacy. All of that kind of fall on the shoulders of the CDO role. How are you seeing it evolving over the last few years?
Yeah, so the CDO role definitely has evolved, Jason, like you mentioned, it's no longer considered just that back office data leader role, right? Today, the CDOs are front and center, managing data and getting the data systems together for the organization, and really are at the forefront of bringing together IT data and business strategies together, right? And with AI and Gen AI kind of being front and center in the industry today, with the President's executive order, things are changing rapidly. There's a renewed focus on how we need to manage data, like we talked about in an earlier segment. And CDOs are really very uniquely positioned to help manage bringing those new data policies into effect. creating those robust data governance frameworks, and making sure that data standards policies are in place at every step of the data lifecycle is so critical. And CDOs are managing that today gracefully, while also making sure that the shared agendas of all other C-suite leaders are in perspective, right? So I almost think about CDO as kind of being that glue that is bringing together other C-suite leaders and helping keep the focus on data, because data really is at the core of the enterprises or the agency's mission goals today. In fact, I've started to see a lot of the data strategies that have been published by agencies now have like data culture, data literacy programs, defining data and AI governance frameworks at the top of those strategy goals. I definitely agree that the CDO role has come a long way since it started. And the number of CDOs are also increasing. Today, I think the Federal CDO Council is over 90 CDOs today. So the Federal CDO Council coming together and creating, providing some more blueprints for how CDOs should function and kind of help leverage templates for data governance has also been a huge topic that the CDOs have been talking about.
I'm glad you brought up the CDO role, the way there are people now who are actually in that role, because initially, I'm sure as you remember, it was, I'm the CIO and the CDO, and then slowly that role got split because it was too much. Mm-hmm. Now we're seeing that with the chief AI officer, right? A lot of the chief AI officers are also CIOs, and then you're starting to get split. OPM is a perfect example as somebody who's hiring for a CAIO, and right now their CIO is wearing both hats. So let's. Did you want to jump in?
That's a good point, because often we're seeing with the executive order, mandating the establishment of the CAIO in every organization. We're sometimes seeing the CDOs taking on that AI portfolio, but really there is no one-size-fits-all model, right? It all depends on the data maturity of that organization and the organization culture too. But I have talked to several CDOs who are now taking on the AI portfolio, or in some organizations it's the CIO that's taking on the AI portfolio. For me, Jason, as I think back on my journey, when I was in the government deputy CDO role for the state of Arkansas to now, the CDO role definitely has evolved. But what's important is whether it's AI or any other emerging tech, CDOs kind of bringing together the other C-suite leaders and creating that shared data agenda is so critical for success.
You mentioned the idea of this governance framework several times, and I think a lot of agencies are still in that early stages. What are you seeing from agency customers around that governance framework? Again, everyone's a little different. No one's at 0, no one's at 100. I'll repeat that a lot. But are you seeing an advancement, a progression of, okay, they have a better understanding of certain areas of their framework and they're still working on other areas? Or any trends you'd point to?
Yeah, there are several agencies that we are working with today that are in different stages of maturity, like you pointed out, right? But I think what I would like to hone into is each agency is taking a more deliberate and a more conscious effort to understand that their data house is in order. Because before you can start adopting and then even scaling emerging tech or AI, you have to ensure that your data house is in order, and all of that starts with having the right data governance frameworks in place. Some agencies are starting off with modernizing their data catalog solutions. Some of them are starting off with refreshing their data policies and standards, data sharing between components of agencies or cross-agency data sharing. All of that requires governance because data is where it all starts. So what I am celebrating is that so many of the agencies that we are working with today are definitely prioritizing their efforts and are putting a reinforced focus on ensuring that their data pipelines are in order so that their data that is being fed to those AI solutions eventually is data that is trustworthy and data that is diverse and out of bias.
The catalog, the standards, the sharing, all important. What I don't hear these days, and I think this is fascinating, and I haven't really thought about it until this conversation today, is I don't hear as many folks talk about the data lake, right? Or the data river, or the data, these big kind of areas that they're going to keep the data in. Do you get a sense, this is a little bit of a curveball I'll throw at you, but do you get a sense that that is either done or it's less important today than it was 7-10 years ago when I think we heard a lot of folks talking about, the need for, we got to have a data lake?
So again, it depends on each agency, right? Different stages of maturity, different data journeys. But I think what is important at the end of the day, Jason, is data readiness. Are you ready to do you know what's in your data house? And is your data ready to be provided as an input to AI solutions or to LLMs or to other solutions? And whatever solution you choose, is it a modernized data solution? Because that's going to kind of dictate how accessible that data is. And do you have the right guardrails around security, privacy, and transparency around it? So to me, it doesn't matter where the agency is in their journey, but so long you are taking step by step and taking a crawl, walk, run approach and getting towards your success line, which is different for each organization.
Data readiness, a key term. Let's start there, because to start using some of these more advanced versions of AI, generative AI as a prime example, you have to have your data readiness. Are you starting to see some use cases around generative AI, or a lot of excitement, but are agencies starting to dip their toes into it?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of excitement, but I do think that there is a lot of adoption happening in the government space as well. Now, there are pockets of adoption, I must say. Again, some agencies are either experimenting with it, some have adopted it, and then some that are actually scaling it. But I'm sure we've talked about examples like knowledge management, case management, policy engines. Those are probably three broad categories that we're seeing several of the agencies and our clients deploying today. Another one that comes to mind is customer experience. And I'll talk about customer experience because I think it impacts you and me too as citizens, because we're always looking for easier ways to get services for us, right? And I think of it in terms of like life events. When I go to a government organization on a life event, think about the disparate data sources that those systems are having to look through before they can give an answer to you. So how can we make that process simpler, more personalized to our citizens? And I think that's a use case which we're seeing getting deployed in multiple areas, whether it's in the health space or others, because what could be better than providing easier services back to our citizens and providing more or less a one-stop shop where technology can go and do the background work and come back to you with easier solutions.
You mentioned the life experiences. We know that the high service impact providers, that's a big push from the Biden administration to really look at, okay, how can we make sure the agencies that are in fact impacting people through CX the most are getting, taking the biggest steps towards CX, and then the life experiences piece bringing a bunch together. So I think it's a great example. Gen AI still has some way to go. You mentioned some people are still experimenting. Are there specific challenges you'd point to that agencies need to consider or are trying to overcome still?
Yeah, again, we're seeing, there are pockets of adoption throughout the government space, and that includes the federal and the state, local, and health space. But I think the challenges kind of go back to some of the data readiness challenges we talked to. But there's also, this thought of, hey, let's jump and find a use case to use for Gen AI. Instead, I kind of say, hey, let's step back and see what problems are we trying to solve for? What problems or what mission areas can we help support today where Gen AI can be useful? And if we take that mindset versus just trying to find a use case for Gen AI, we would be helping solve mission problems that exist today. But the challenges, again, Jason, kind of exist around balancing opportunities with the risk. We know Gen AI has a lot of potential, but we just have to take a more calculated approach of balancing that opportunity with the risk and ensuring that we have the right guardrails in place, right? And that starts with data. Everything starts with data. But we also have to ensure that as we are creating these AI solutions, we have the right frameworks in place to manage trust, bias, privacy, security. Are we really using data commensurate with the regulations that we collected that data for? As we provide the data to the AI applications, are we providing the right transparency, the right ethical boundaries around it? Because we are living at a time where humans and machines are working together. But what we don't want to do is create solutions which are only machine-based and have no human values at the center of it. And again, I think I would tie this back to the CDO role, because I think they're so uniquely positioned to be embedded in this life cycle and to ensure that they are providing the right ethical considerations as we are creating these solutions. So I just want to kind of tie that up by saying, we're creating AI and machine-focused solutions, but we have to be careful and have human-centered values in the center of it all.
It's a common refrain we hear about keeping the human in the loop. I think anyone who has fears over the AI, taking over our lives, I think there's a whole lot of discussion always, hey, don't worry, any decision that gets made from a government perspective is still going to have a human in the loop. I think that's a great point to reiterate. You mentioned the calculated approach, and it goes back to the governance side. It comes back to, you mentioned trust, bias, privacy, security, all those pieces and parts. Is one harder than the other? They're not done by itself. They're all done in parallel, but is one part harder than the other? Do you get a sense? I
think they all have a piece to play. In the end, I think it's really a really balanced equation between rigorous processes of governance, comprehensive change management, as well as organizational collaboration, right? I think it's a mix, and having sort of like a framework that you can abide by and kind of have checkboxes for as you move forward with the process is probably your best recipe for success.
Aditya, we're almost out of time. I very much enjoyed our conversation. I'm going to give you the last word. We talked a lot about different topics, but bring this all together. What's the big takeaway from our conversation? What do you want to make sure folks are left with from our discussion?
Thanks, Jason. I have enjoyed the conversation, so thanks for the opportunity to be here. But I do want to leave the audience with the thought that Gen AI, we're just starting to see the start of it. I do feel that government is really well poised to leverage in AI and improve the way government operates, innovates, and communicates today. But we have to be careful with that approach, and we have to balance our opportunity with our risk. So it has to be a combination of not just regulatory needs, but societal, business, and all of those needs coming together. So that would be my final words. I think Gen AI has great potential. Let's just balance it with the right risk frameworks in place.
I think that goes with any technology. I think Gen AI brings a lot more concerns and opportunities. So good advice. Unfortunately, we are out of time for today. So let me thank my guest. Aditya Kokera is the Chief Data Officer for Government and Public Services Practice at Deloitte Consulting. Aditya, thank you so much again for taking the time.
Thanks, Jason.
You've been listening to the discussion, Data Readiness for AI and the Expanded CDA Role, sponsored by Deloitte on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Deloitte.